Presenter is Lynn Redwood, so please.
Thank you, Martin. I just want to state that I'm presenting today as a private citizen, and I am not representing any federal agency. Next slide, please. The recognition that infants and children were being exposed to levels of mercury that exceeded EPA federal safety guidelines from vaccines was due to an act of Congress. The Food and Drug Administration's Modernization Act of 1997 mandated the FDA to compile a list of drugs and foods that contain intentionally introduced mercury compounds and provide an analysis of the types of mercury and the exposure levels. What was most concerning was the identification of several pediatric vaccines that utilize multi-dose vials, including inactivated flu vaccines, DTaP, Hib, hepatitis B, and other formulations, along with immunoglobulin therapies such as hepatitis B. Next slide. In July of 1999, a joint statement was issued by the Public Health Service and the American Academy of Pediatrics, which called for the immediate reduction and elimination of mercury-based preservative thimerosal from infant vaccines based on the findings that infants and children who received these vaccines could be exposed to mercury in excess of federal safety guidelines. And because any potential risk of concern, the Public Health Service and AAP and vaccine manufacturers all agreed that thimerosal-containing vaccines should be removed as soon as possible. Next slide. In October of 2001, the Institute of Medicine's Immunization Safety Review Committee, wait a second, I think I've missed a slide here. Okay. Immunization Review Committee released a report on thimerosal-containing vaccines and neurodevelopmental disorders. The committee supported the prior decisions made by ASAP and the AAP to call for the removal of thimerosal from vaccines that are part of the recommended childhood immunization schedule. But they also noted that some vaccines that are not part of the recommended childhood immunization schedule still contain thimerosal as a preservative and could be given to some children. Those included DT, TT, influenza, pneumococcal vaccines, and other lingering concerns about an unknown quality of thimerosal-containing Hib, hepatitis B, and DTaP vaccines that were still on the shelf. The committee recommended that the use of thimerosal-free DTaP, Hib, and Hep B vaccines, despite the fact that there might be remaining supplies of thimerosal-containing vaccines available, and that full consideration be given by appropriate professional societies and government agencies to removing thimerosal from vaccines administered to infants, children, or pregnant women in the United States. Unfortunately, these recommendations were not acknowledged or implemented. Next slide. The FDA assessed thimerosal's use in vaccines in 1997 to 1999, and they were unable to locate any clinical studies formally evaluating the use of thimerosal before its initial marketing in the 1930s. FDA found one study published in 1931 where thimerosal was administered to individuals suffering from meningococcal meningitis. The study was not designed to specifically examine toxicity, there was no clinical assessments, and there was no laboratory studies reported. In the paper, the authors acknowledged that the clinician who was treating the meningitis patients was not convinced of its efficacy, stating beneficial effects of the drug were not definitively proven. Industry scientists noted in 1930 that a wide range of toxicity and injury tests should be done, but there's no evidence that these studies were ever conducted. FDA grandfathered in thimerosal without formal submission of any animal safety data. Next slide. Thimerosal was first introduced as a preservative in vaccines in the 1930s after being developed and patented in 1927 and subsequently marketed by Eli Lilly under the trade name of merthiolate in 1928. After a deadly incident of bacterial contamination of vaccines in Australia where 12 children died from staphylococcal contaminated diphtheria vaccine, the FDA developed regulations requiring that all multi-dose vaccines contained a preservative to prevent contamination. Thimerosal is used during the manufacturing process and when packaging multi-dose vials to prevent bacterial and fungal contamination. And by the 1930s, thimerosal became widely used as a preservative in vaccines and other medical products. Next slide. Starting in the late 1920s, scientists began voicing concerns regarding the effectiveness of thimerosal and published several articles arguing thimerosal was ineffective. As a result, the FDA convened a panel of experts to evaluate the use of thimerosal in over-the-counter products. The panel reported that thimerosal was 35.3 times more toxic for embryonic chick heart tissue than for Staphylococcus aureus. They also found evidence that thimerosal was no better than water in protecting mice from potential fatal streptococcal infections. The FDA issued a report of the panel's findings in the Federal Register in 1982, which concluded that thimerosal was not safe for over-the-counter topical use because of its potential for cell damage, and that it was not effective as a topical antimicrobial because of its bacteriostatic action could be reversed. In response, the FDA reported in April of 1998, in the Federal Register final rulemaking that it concluded the use of thimerosal in over-the-counter products is not generally recognized as safe or effective.
In 98.
Next slide. Thimerosal has not been shown to prevent all bacterial contamination in vaccines, as evidenced by clusters of disease of group A streptococcus infections traced to multi-dose DPT vials that were contaminated after opening. Thimerosal was present in acceptable levels in unopened vials of the vaccine from the same lot. The authors concluded that preservatives in multi-dose vials do not prevent short-term bacterial contamination, and the only feasible and cost-effective preventative measure now is careful attention to sterile technique when administering vaccines from multi-dose vials. Next slide.
70 years, decades.
A more current in vitro investigation into the cytotoxic effects and antimicrobial activity of thimerosal was published in 2023 that mirrors the previous research. The authors reported that thimerosal should be present in culture media at 100 micrograms per milliliter, which is the concentration that was necessary to achieve effective antimicrobial activity, but all tested cells lost viability at 4.6 micrograms per milliliter. They concluded that overall, the study revealed thimerosal was 333-fold more toxic to human and animal cells as compared to bacterial and fungal cells. Our results promote more study of thimerosal toxicity and its antimicrobial effectiveness to obtain more safe concentrations and biopharmaceuticals. Those were the conclusions of the authors in 2023. The research that resulted in thimerosal not being recognized as being generally accepted as safe and effective in over-the-counter products was published decades ago, but today those concerns still exist. Next slide. In 1987, the Commission of the European Communities initiated a research project on 10 known or suspected spindle poisons. Thimerosal was found to cause significant interference with microtubule polymerization, destabilizing the spindle machinery that ensures accurate chromosomal separation during cell division. This mechanistic disruption suggests direct mutagenic potential via structural chromosomal abnormalities, which is a known pathway to carcinogenesis and congenital defects. By affecting fundamental cellular structure at the molecular level, thimerosal revealed strong mechanistic evidence for mutagenicity and developmental toxicity even before in vitro confirmation. Next slide. California's Proposition 65 is a state law that requires California to identify chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm, and to ensure public warnings when people might be exposed to them. Thimerosal has been recognized as a Prop 65 chemical since 1990. In 2003, a petition was filed on behalf of the Bayer Corporation for reconsideration of the determination that mercury and mercury compounds as reproductive toxicants, which included thimerosal in the listing. The California EPA responded, and this is a quote, "The scientific evidence that thimerosal can cause reproductive toxicity is robust. Thimerosal dissociates in the body to ethylmercury. The evidence for its reproductive toxicity includes severe mental retardation or malformations in human offspring who were poisoned when their mothers were exposed to ethylmercury or thimerosal when pregnant. Studies in animals demonstrating developmental toxicity after exposure to either methylmercury, and data showing interconversion to other forms of mercury that also clearly cause reproductive toxicity."
We're talking about
Next slide.
several generations of human beings that had it.
A study published in Pediatrics in 2000 measured blood levels in preterm and term infants after administration of the hepatitis B vaccine containing 12.5 micrograms of ethylmercury. The investigation documented elevated post-immunization concentrations relative to pre-immunization levels in all neonates studied. Levels of blood mercury after exposure in low birth weight infants were 7.36 plus or minus 4.99 micrograms per liter. One infant was found to have developed a mercury level of 23.6 micrograms per liter, thus meeting CDC's criteria as a case of chemical poisoning for mercury, which the level for that is 10 micrograms per liter. The study subjects had measurable blood concentrations prior to immunizations, indicating that risk assessment should also include background mercury levels from other sources. Next slide. Experts contend that there are windows of vulnerability which occur during neurological development, and that specific types of developmental outcomes may have separate windows of vulnerability. These critical periods of development have not been established, and they may be relatively short in duration. The fact that thimerosal from vaccines has been documented to raise blood mercury levels over known thresholds where developmental effects have been documented to occur during the first few months of life means that particular windows of vulnerability may have been breached. Even minor neurological impairment can have profound societal effects when it's amortized across the entire population and lifespan. Next slide. A 2005 study funded by the National Institutes of Health compared brain mercury levels in infant macaques exposed to injected ethylmercury thimerosal that was modeled after vaccine exposures and equal amounts of ingested methylmercury. In this study, ethylmercury more rapidly converted to inorganic mercury in the brains of the primates, which resulted in increasing levels of inorganic mercury. In fact, the primates exposed to the ethylmercury retained twice as much inorganic mercury in their brains compared to the primates exposed to methylmercury. The relative concentration of monkeys with detectable levels of inorganic mercury were twice the amount as the methylmercury group, methylmercury-treated monkeys, which inorganic levels, and the ones where inorganic levels were detectable. Inorganic mercury is below detectable levels in 8 out of 17 of the methylmercury-treated monkeys. Why this is important is that once inorganic mercury compounds reach the brain tissue, they rapidly dealkylate into Hg2+, which is a toxic form of inorganic mercury that gets trapped in the neurons as it cannot penetrate back out through the blood-brain barrier. Next slide. A recent review outlined evidence from human case studies, animal models, and modeling assessments that estimated an inorganic mercury half-life in the human brain of at least 5 to 27 years. The impact of mercury exposure to the developing brain interferes with neuronal proliferation, migration, neuronal differentiation, synaptogenesis, and tightly regulated apoptosis, and other processes vital to the formation and functioning of the nervous system, which can result in lifelong impacts. Exposure during the first trimester of pregnancy may result in deficits or defects very different from those developed by someone who is exposed during the third trimester of pregnancy. And the authors also summed up that there may not be a safe level of mercury exposure, especially for an unborn child. Next slide. Thimerosal is 49.6 mercury by weight, and the standard concentration in flu vaccines is 0.01%, which equals 550 micrograms per 0.5 milliliter dose. This equates to 100 micrograms per milliliter of thimerosal and 50 of mercury in the vaccine solution. EPA's toxicity characteristic leaching procedure is used to determine whether a substance is considered a hazardous waste based on its potential to leach toxic chemicals into groundwater. According to EPA's TCLP, the mercury threshold is 0.2 milligrams per liter, or 200 parts per billion, or 200 micrograms per liter. Flu vaccine concentration is approximately 50,000 micrograms per liter, which is 250 times greater than the TCLP limit. Therefore, thimerosal-containing vaccines exceed the TCLP threshold by an orders of magnitude and are classified as D009 hazardous waste.
But yet, they've been administering it since.
This slide is an image of information that's available online with regard to the appropriate disposal guidelines for the 2025 flu season. And I want to highlight the very last paragraph, which states, all full or partially used multi-dose vials of seasonal flu vaccine should be disposed of as a federally hazardous waste. But I've not seen this information being distributed to clinicians who are administering flu vaccines, or something that the general public is aware of.
I'm willing to bet a lot of people
Next
aren't aware of
slide.
it.
I just wanted to point out the most susceptible populations with regard to exposure to mercury. Obviously, pregnant women and the developing fetus are the most vulnerable to mercury exposures, and this is followed by young children. There was a landmark study published in 2003 by Stern that actually found that infants, when born, when they tested cord blood to the maternal blood, had a much higher level, 1.7 times higher than the mother's blood at birth. The rapid neurodevelopment that takes place prenatally and the first years of life, along with immature detox pathways and the possibility for genetic susceptibility, is why the Institute of Medicine in 2001 recommended that these sensitive populations not be exposed to mercury. And also you'll see there that older adults can also be at risk, and there's been several studies that have come out over the last few years that have found elevated levels of mercury associated with cardiovascular disease. Next slide. In summary, mercury is the third most toxic element on Earth, only behind polonium and plutonium, and it has no physiological role in the human body. Thimerosal was grandfathered for use without adequate safety testing by the FDA, and is not generally recognized as being safe or effective by the FDA over-the-counter division since 1998. There's also evidence that thimerosal is not an effective preservative at vaccine levels, and that thimerosal can cross the placenta and blood-brain barriers and converts to inorganic mercury in the brain at higher levels than methylmercury. Studies have identified infants with blood levels after exposure to thimerosal-containing vaccines that breach CDC guidelines for a case of mercury toxicity, mercury chemical poisoning. Hold on. Next slide, please. Thimerosal is recognized as a developmental and reproductive toxicant and is listed as a chemical on the California Proposition 65 list since 1990. Unused doses of thimerosal preserved flu shots must be disposed of as a hazardous waste. And tremendous progress has been made in removing thimerosal. But from data that I recently received, more than 60,000 pregnant women received thimerosal-containing flu vaccines through Medicaid in the 2019-2020 flu season. We currently have enough thimerosal-free vaccines to recommend that all pregnant women, infants, and children receive only thimerosal-free vaccines. After a critical appraisal of this issue almost 25 years ago, the prestigious Institute of Medicine made this same recommendation. Removing a known neurotoxin from being injected into our most vulnerable population is a good place to start with making America healthy again. Thank you. Also, I believe one of the FDA people are here that could possibly comment on what the availability is for thimerosal-free flu vaccines as well. Thank you very much, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to make the first comment. We know that mercury is a toxin. We cannot completely avoid exposure to mercury, but it's a cumulative issue. So we already have some exposure to mercury from other sources. So even if the amount available in the vaccine, maybe that amount is safe, but that's not the amount we're exposed to. We're exposed to mercury from other sources, so it's cumulative. And there is a need, and if we care about public health, we should try to minimize exposure to mercury. I know that FDA do not allow mercury, for example, in skin products. If that's the only exposure you had, that would probably be safe. But we want to minimize the cumulative exposure. So the first argument for not having mercury in the vaccines is that it's a cumulative exposure. The second thing, for seasonal influenza vaccines, there are alternatives. And in fact, most of the influenza vaccines given today do not contain mercury or thimerosal. They are in single dose. So it's very feasible, I think, very feasible to not use thimerosal containing vaccines for seasonal influenza, so we don't really need it. The third thing is that I'm not an expert on marketing, but if we put mercury in a product, people are not going to want to buy those products. If we put mercury in cereal, that's not a good idea, because a lot of people won't buy the cereal if we have mercury in it. So if we want to have confidence in vaccine and we want to promote people taking vaccines, we should remove these mercury-containing preservatives from the seasonal influenza. So those are my view on this matter. And I will now open up to other members of the committee to do comments or questions. Dr. Malone, please.
One minor addition point is that we're speaking about seasonal influenza, which is recommended for redosing on an annual basis. So that would be for those unfortunate few receiving doses from a multi-dose vial, which I don't know the profile of who those people might be, but one could speculate there might be a bias towards underserved populations or populations that don't have access to the same level of financial resources because because the cost of single dose is a little bit higher. That means that we do have a risk of repeated exposure to this. So it's not just a one administration, but a potential chronic exposure through lifetime on an annual basis. Over.
Thank you. Dr. Levi?
First, I would like to concur with the last two comments. I also think that we need to emphasize that there is somewhat an implicit trade-off that we either use mercury or we are taking a risk of contamination of fungal and bacterial contamination. I think we should reject that trade-off. I think we should have integrity of the supply chain and handling of vaccines and drugs that we provide to patients. I think that there are technologies that should allow us to identify in real time potential contamination, and we need to think seriously about how we either prevent them or prevent them better, or be able to detect them in real time and prevent them from getting to patients. So I think that's another aspect that is maybe not directly related to the issue, but I think I want to kind of highlight it.
Yeah, I think the single dose that are the ones that's mostly used today does not contain thimerosal, and there's no problem with contamination at all because it's a single dose. Any other questions or comments from the members of the committee?
Martin?
We have Jay. Okay, Dr. Meissner, please.
Thank you, Dr. Calder. I'm not quite sure how to respond to this presentation. This is an old issue that has been addressed in the past, and there are many aspects, I think, that we could discuss, but we don't have time to go into it here. I guess one of the most important to remember is that thimerosal is metabolized into ethyl mercury and thiosalicylate. It's not metabolized into methyl mercury, which is in fish and shellfish. Ethyl mercury is excreted much more quickly from the body. It is not associated with the high neurotoxicity that methyl mercury is. And as many experts, vaccine experts have said, including Paul Offit, all vaccines that are routinely recommended for young children in the United States are available in formulations that do not contain thimerosal as a preservative. This is also true for adolescents and adults, including pregnant women. So, of all the issues that I think ACIP needs to focus on, this is not a big issue. I will also hasten to add that thimerosal is included in most vaccines that are administered around the globe. And that is because single-dose vials are more expensive, and many countries cannot afford a single-dose vial. Now, I realize ACIP is focused on the United States.
It's 11 o'clock.
But the recommendations that the ACIP makes are followed among many countries around the world. And removing thimerosal from all vaccines that are used in other countries, for example, is going to reduce access to these vaccines. It will increase cost. And I think it's important to note that no study has ever indicated any harm from thimerosal. It's been used in vaccines, as was noted by Ms. Redwood, since before World War II.
Since the
The
40s.
decision by the FDA to remove thimerosal as much as possible is a very reasonable recommendation. But this recommendation was made not because there was any evidence of harm from thimerosal.
Bullshit.
It was made in an effort, as you said, Dr. Kaldorf, to reduce the total exposure to mercury in our environment. That's a reasonable objective.
Because it's harmful.
But you also have to consider what are the consequences of these sorts of recommendations. So I'm not sure if we're going to have a vote here or wording, but I don't think this is an issue. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Perez. Yes, sorry, we're looking at a response from Lynn Redwood first.
Yes, just real quickly, I want to point out that in a lot of the studies that have been done, like the Hazardous study, they looked at blood levels, and they found that the thimerosal, when infants were exposed to thimerosal, the blood levels were lower, and it seemed to leave the body more quickly. But what we have learned is that thimerosal has a higher binding affinity for tissue. and that just because it left the blood, it didn't mean that it exited the body.
Exactly.
And in fact, what we're finding is that blood is not a good predictor in terms of toxicity, because blood is not the organ of toxicity, the brain is the organ of toxicity. And even if you have lower blood levels from ethyl mercury has a higher blood-brain ratio than methylmercury. So even at lower levels, more will get into the brain. And when we looked at the conversion and we looked at inorganic mercury, which is what is really the toxic element that gets trapped in the brain, the inorganic mercury in the ethyl mercury primates was like 70%, and it was only 10% in the methyl mercury primates. So I'm just going to have to say that I don't know that scientifically the argument that methyl mercury is safer than ethyl mercury based on the Burbacher study would not prove that out. Also, in terms of third world countries, I want to remind the committee that there are other approved preservatives that can be used in place of thimerosal, for example, 2-phenoxyethanol. So, and I think there's other things that we can do as well. We have made such tremendous advances that we should not be relying on a product that is so neurotoxic when there's other safer preservatives available as well.
I would just like to respond, if I may.
Please do.
The ACIP makes recommendations based on scientific evidence as much as possible. And there is no scientific evidence that thimerosal has caused a problem. And you are correct.
Bullshit.
There are several other preservatives that could be used. Benzethonium chloride, 2-phenoxyethanol are alternatives,
Until
but they have not been
70
studied to
years
the
from
same
now, they're
extent.
deemed unsafe.
2-phenoxyethanol is, in fact, I believe that's included in the polio vaccine. But to make the industry jump through hoops for something for which there is no evidence of harm, I think is an issue that needs further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Petsworth.
I would just like to say that on the basis of the precautionary principle and the fact that women early in pregnancy could continue to get flu vaccine that contains thimerosal, if there's a way to phase this out, to eliminate its use, because it is a known neurotoxin, we should make every effort to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Levi.
Yeah, I may want to share a different perspective about understanding the risk. I think that the notion there is no evidence that it causes harm is a somewhat tricky notion in this setting, because we have to define what the potential harm is. If the potential harm is some cumulative exposure, then I think we need to do whatever we can do to control the controllable sources of exposure, because there are some uncontrollable ones that we may not be able to control. So I think that that's true for other aspects. I know we kind of committed to also look on the cumulative impacts of vaccination. These are the same kind of issues that if you start looking one by one on each specific exposure, you might conclude, okay, nothing wrong with that. But if you try enough time and in a cumulative way, you might have some harm. And in this case, it's clearly you have harm. So it's actually, that's not debatable based on my understanding of the evidence. So I just think that we need to adopt a more kind of holistic, long-term kind of perspective about what the risks are.
I think that's an extremely important point. Let's say a child is exposed to mercury from 10 different sources. Each of those 10 sources might be small enough that source in itself is not dangerous. But if you then put all 10 together, then it might be dangerous. So it's a cumulative exposure. So that means that if you did a study on every one of these 10, you would not find anything. But we know that mercury is a toxin. So the key thing is to minimize the total exposure, the cumulative exposure. We do that by removing the exposure in any way we can. And there are some exposures we can't remove, but whatever we can remove will help reduce the total amount of exposure to mercury. And we do know that mercury is a toxin, so that's, I don't think anybody is claiming that it's not. Dr. Hibble?
Thank you. Should this committee vote affirmatively to this question, I think that we should note that that the precautionary principle is not a mandate for us to make decisions. That also with the question of cumulative doses, there is still no demonstrable evidence of harm that we can evaluate, and that is certainly a departure from the criteria used by this committee. And alternatively, we need to be aware, as noted, that the fear of mercury is substantial, and the fear of mercury in causing people to not get vaccines is a risk in itself. Whether the actual molecule is at risk or not, we have to respect the fear of mercury as a potential toxin to avoid people getting vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you. And those psychological aspects is actually a very important part of public health science. So if you want to do it, things evidence-based, that is part of the equations.
Better change people's
Dr. Malone?
mindset then.
I request comment from our representative from the FDA, particularly concerning the magnitude of potential impact both in influenza vaccines, ergo, what fraction of doses are we actually talking about in the United States? And whether there's what is the current status of thimerosal in any other vaccine products other than multi-dose influenza vaccine products, and any other aspects of this that the FDA can help inform the committee of? Over.
Sure, yeah, this is Tracy Beth Hogue from the FDA. And so the data that I've been provided with by CBER, and I thank them for their help, it looks like less than 5%, between 4 and 5% in the 2024-2025 season of influenza doses were multi-dose thimerosal containing vaccines, and so the remainder were single-dose preparations. And moving forward, I want to confirm what Lynn stated, that that next year, that for the next season, it does not look like we would be limited in terms of availability if we were to switch to only using the single dose preparations. And again, I've had this confirmed by my CBER colleagues. And to my understanding, that this is the only current vaccination on the childhood schedule that children could potentially receive, or pregnant women containing thimerosal.
Thank you for that. We also have some comments. We're going to go to Stacy Buchanan first.
Administering thimerosal in these vaccines for decades. For decades. And now they deem it unsafe, and it doesn't seem to be a big deal. And
We can hear you.
not related to other
I was
ailments
just
though,
making
right?
sure. So I'm Dr. Stacy Buchanan. I represent the National Association of Pediatric Nurse Practitioners. And I was just wanting to comment and make sure that it's very clear that none of the pediatric vaccines on the schedule, the childhood, adolescent schedule, contain thimerosal. And what I was just doing a brief cursory dive to see, and there's only about 3 products that contain thimerosal with the what's listed on the FDA website for multi-dose influenza products. So
There's other
I
things,
really
though.
wanted to key into this because we're taking time to discuss it, and the potential exposures are very, very limited. Back in 2001 is when the thimerosal was removed from a lot of the products that reach children. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And thank you, Dr. Meisner, for eloquently speaking. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And Author Phyllis.
Thank you, Dr. Kildar. Just two quick, I have one question and a request. Thank you, Ms. Redwood, for the presentation. I wondered if you could share the source of the 60,000 Medicaid patients, just for our information. And then secondly, there was a document on the website initially that was a CDC document on the thimerosal issue. I wondered if that could be reposted as well to accompany Ms. Redwood's presentation. Thank you.
This is Dr. Malone. My understanding is that article was not authorized by the Office of the Secretary and has been removed consequent. I'm sure that the Office of the Secretary will make note of your comment and direct the CDC as necessary. Over.
And all of us members on the committee has received that, so we have all read it. So in the committee we all know about that thing. So Matthew Sam, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the chance to speak. I'm Matt Zahn, liaison from NATRO, National Association of Finance and Health Officials. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I very much appreciate Dr. Meisner's comments. He mentioned it, but I really wanted to amplify the point that Dr. Meisner mentioned. There hasn't been evidence of harm done by thimerosal-containing vaccines. But it's really worth emphasizing that is based on a 25-year robust history of studies that examine the real-life outcomes for children who have received thimerosal-containing vaccines, either in the prenatal or the pediatric period. And children would theoretically be at the highest risk because they are neurodeveloping and because they are receiving more of these vaccines. But studies in multiple different countries where thimerosal continues to be used, as Dr. Meisner said, that it was used around the world, United Kingdom, Sweden, Denmark, they have done cohort studies, meaning look at all the children born over a 1 year or multi-year period of time in those countries and compared the neurologic outcomes of those kids who have received thimerosal to those who are not. And again, neurologic outcomes are thought to be the one primary risk that we're talking about. These were large, well-conducted studies. The totality of evidence from those studies strongly indicates there isn't an association between thimerosal and adverse medical outcomes in children. And based on that, thimerosal is continuing to be offered now. Again, it's not in the pediatric vaccine series, but I still think this data is pretty powerful in terms of demonstrating the safety of these vaccines. And I think someone had mentioned that, the psychological concerns of thimerosal in the vaccines. I would note that, as Dr. Meisner mentioned, I don't see this as a very large public health risk issue. And what are the psychological issues associated with broadcasting widely the notion that this question has not been answered or is a significant issue that CDC needs to dedicate public health resources to? I feel like it's a question that's been answered, and I feel like as a PEDS ID physician, as a public health practitioner, I'm very confident that thimerosal-containing vaccines are safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph Naima.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. This is Dr. Naima Joseph. I'm a maternal fetal medicine physician, and I'm here representing the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. I wanted to emphasize a couple of points. First, that I appreciate this committee's attempt to portray transparently some concerns from the public, including the risk of thimerosal. I wanted to emphasize the previous speaker's comments as well as comments made by Dr. Meissner regarding the overwhelming evidence over multiple decades of research that support, one, that the ingredient has been removed from most products, but two, safety. And I wanted to address particularly the concerns about exposure, prenatal exposure, and that during pregnancy. And as a physician, and again, as part of the expert committee for ACOG, when we make recommendations to our patients and to our society members, one, we are comfortable with the overwhelming data that show that prenatal exposure has not been linked to any ASDs or autism spectrum disorders. That data is concrete. That had been available on the CDC website, which has now been taken down. Second, when we look at the harms associated with influenza during pregnancy, as was demonstrated to this group yesterday, when we looked at infant hospitalization, we saw that the overwhelming majority of hospitalizations occurred in infants who were not eligible for vaccination, proving again that maternal immunization does provide infant benefit against the risk of hospitalization, which we know is associated with extreme psychologic risk, maternal infant bonding, developmental delays, and iatrogenic infection. And third, we know that these do confer pregnancy-related risk in terms of prevention against preterm birth, prematurity, again associated with developmental delays, psychological concerns for the infant, but also maternal risk. Again, I wanted to point out that this vaccination during pregnancy provides a maternal infant benefit, two for the price of one, protects against maternal severe disease and secondarily obstetric risk, and then further provides infant protection that is durable at least for the first 2 to 6 months of life. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Gorman.
Thank you, Jason Goldman, American College of Physicians. Once again, Dr. Meissner spoke very eloquently about some of the concerns. This committee has always prided itself on openness, transparency, and review of data and evidence. So I am wondering if we will have an actual scientific presentation with peer-reviewed literature, strong evidence to actually discuss this issue, as many statements have been made here today without support of science or evidence, but merely opinion. So in fairness, will we be seeing, if necessary, even though the established data for decades really speaks to the safety and efficacy of thimerosal, if necessary, will there be an actual CDC presentation done by staff, scientists, physicians, and those who are subject matter experts with accurate peer-reviewed scientific data for the ability for the committee to review, or will we have layperson presentations only? Thank you.
Thank you. Molly Howell.
Hi, thank you to the committee. I represent the Association of Immunization Managers, and one of our roles is to prepare and respond to pandemics. And I'm wondering how this discussion will impact our pandemic preparedness. My understanding is that multi-dose vials and potentially thimerosal would be used should there be a future influenza pandemic. And so I don't know if federal partners can speak to how this would impact if we could no longer use thimerosal containing vaccines, our pandemic preparedness. My other question is, if there is a concern about thimerosal in vaccines, why is the FDA then not restricting the use of thimerosal in vaccines? Thanks.
So the vote today is for seasonal influenza vaccines, not for a pandemic, because there's no such vaccines currently on the market, I think. So the future meetings of ACIP and CDC will have to consider those things. Now we have Kelly Good, and I think that will be the last comment.
Yes, Kelly Good, thank you for the opportunity representing the American Pharmacists Association. I would also like to again ask the question posed by Dr. Goldman about the ACIP process and transparency and seeing the evidence to recommendations, which includes the balance of benefits and harms, the values and preferences of affected populations, the resource implications, the equity considerations, and the feasibility of this question and vote before ACIP. Thank you.
So we have had a presentation from Lynn Redwood, who is very knowledgeable about vaccines. This committee will and will always be open and receive comments from a variety of people. That's part of us being transparent. We had earlier comments today from on other topics from the pharmaceutical companies. So we will, that's the principle that we have. And I think it's inappropriate to dismiss a presentation just because the person does not have a PhD or an MD. There are a lot of knowledgeable people who we would like to hear from, and we want to hear from a variety of viewpoints. And I think today's discussion is a very good example that we have received input from a variety of people on this topic, and we will continue to do that as this committee moves forward at future meetings. There will eventually be a vote on this topic, but that will be at the end after public comments. We do have a few minutes left before public comments at 11:30, so I would like to move forward now with a 5-minute presentation of Chikungunya vaccines. It was supposed to have longer, but we will hear more about that at our next meeting. So at this time, just a short presentation about Chikungunya vaccine by Dr. Lyle Peterson, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm Dr. Lyle Peterson, and I'm the director of the Division of Vector-Borne Diseases here at CDC. And today I will update you on work group progress on assessing the evidence to recommendations for use of chikungunya virus vaccines among persons in the U.S. territories at risk for chikungunya virus transmission. I will also provide an update on reporting of adverse events following administration of the live attenuated chikungunya virus vaccine. And as was mentioned, given the limitations in time right now, my presentation has been shortened, and the full background information from the slides from the full presentation are in the meeting materials online. Next slide. So as some background to today's session, there are 2 licensed chikungunya virus vaccines. A live attenuated vaccine was licensed in November 2023 for use in persons aged 18 years and older, and a virus-like particle vaccine was licensed in February 2025 for use in persons aged 12 years and older. The chikungunya vaccines work group was formed in May 2022, and recommendations have already been approved for use of both vaccines in travelers and laboratory workers. Most recently, the work group has been discussing use of the chikungunya virus vaccines in residents of U.S. territories and states at risk for transmission. The 2 components of the evidence to recommendations to name the work group were able to finish discussing before this meeting were the public health problem and the values domains. And given the shortened time frame of the presentation, I will summarize the conclusions of the work group with the full background provided in the complete slide deck online. Next slide. So for the public health problem domain, the work group concluded that acute illness can be severe, particularly in vulnerable groups, including infants and the elderly with comorbidities, and that arthralgia can persist for months to years. Also, as a future outbreak is likely to evolve rapidly and might affect a substantial proportion of the population, outbreaks can overwhelm health services, and no highly effective control measures exist apart from vaccination. So given this, the working group concluded that chikungunya virus can have substantial impact in the U.S. territories, primarily related to large and substantial outbreaks. Next slide. So the working group also looked at data from surveys conducted in Puerto Rico and the USVI as background for the values and preferences domain for the U.S. territories. The key finding was that most participants were interested in the hypothetical chikungunya vaccine, although interest was higher in Puerto Rico than in USVI, possibly due to survey timing relative to outbreaks, as well as differences in general vaccine uptake in the two territories. For respondents potentially not interested in vaccine, a key concern in both locations was needing a better understanding of vaccine safety. So for the question, does the target population feel that the desirable effects of vaccination are large relative to the undesirable effects? The work group felt that the response was probably yes, although the working group indicated that there was important uncertainty or variability in how much people value the main outcomes. Next slide. So finally, I would like to provide a brief update on safety of the live attenuated chikungunya vaccine in older persons. Next slide. So at the April 2025 ACIP meeting, the work group reported on 6 serious adverse events in U.S. persons aged 65 years and older that had occurred during 2024 and were reported through the U.S. Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. Following discussions at that meeting, CDC determined that age 65 years and older was a precaution to the live attenuated chikungunya virus vaccine. In the 3 weeks following the ACIP meeting, an additional 11 serious adverse events were reported internationally, persons aged 62 to 89 years, most of whom had underlying medical conditions. The reports were mainly from Réunion, an overseas department of France, where a vaccination campaign was being implemented in response to a large outbreak. The European Medicines Agency recommended a temporary pause in the use of the vaccine in persons aged 65 years and older, and FDA and CDC subsequently recommended a temporary pause in vaccine use in persons aged 60 years and older to allow investigations of these reports. We're currently awaiting the outcome of the FDA investigation. So that concludes my report for this morning or for this afternoon, depending where you are. But thanks to ACIP, Chikungunya Vaccines Working Group, and to CDC participants in gathering the data of the working group. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. We're looking forward to receive more information about the Chikungunya vaccines at our next ACIP meeting. My apologies, I think there was a request. Lynn River wanted to respond to some of the comments that we heard, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Just real quickly, I just wanted to point out that a lot.
Next ACIP meeting. My apologies, I think.
I don't know what happened. I just wanted to point out real quickly, I know that there was a report that circulated, I believe it focused primarily on the 2004 IOM investigation regarding thimerosal containing vaccines and autism. And if you actually read that report, there's several important things in there. One is that the committee mentioned repeatedly that these large epidemiological studies would not be able to detect a subportion of the population that might be more genetically vulnerable, which is what one of the hypotheses is. The committee also dismissed findings of immune activation and inflammation in the brains of animal models that had been exposed to thimerosal containing vaccines because they had changed what would be the criteria from their 2001 report, which was biological plausibility, to 2004 to biological mechanisms. And at that time, we didn't really know what the biological mechanisms were. And so one of the things that they recommended is that there's no evidence that there's any neuroinflammation or immune activation in the brains of children with autism. 1 year after that, in 2005, there was a landmark study published by Carlos Pardo that documented exactly that. This was autopsy brain tissue in children and adults that found a chronic ongoing neuroinflammatory process in the brains. And today, those findings have replicated over and over again, and it's one of the hallmarks that we see in autism. I also wanted to say that there was a study that was published by the CDC here by, let's see, it was Dr. Thompson, early thimerosal exposure and neuropsychological outcomes at 7 to 10 years. This was published, I'm just looking it up right now. I'm sorry, I could have brought this information as well. But they found that one of the associations was with ticks. And ticks can be very debilitating. So there have been studies that have found evidence of harm. So I just wanted to make those two comments. There was another one, and I can't remember what it was right now specifically, but those were just the two main comments I wanted to reply. There is evidence, there are studies. I can provide a list of those if the committee would like.
The committee don't want to hear those.
Thank you very much. We will go to the votes now, or the public comments, but before that, I will just read what the draft votes are, and there are 4. We don't. Yes, so we're not voting now, so there's no motions pending, but I'm just reading the draft votes, because we have to do that before the public comments. So the first one is recommendations for influenza vaccination for the 2025-26 season. ACIP reaffirms recommendation for routine annual influenza vaccination for all persons ages greater than 6 months who do not have contraindication. The second draft vote, ACIP recommends children 18 years and younger receive seasonal influenza vaccine only in single-dose formulation that are free from thimerosal as a preservative. Draft vote number 3, ACIP recommends pregnant women receive seasonal influenza vaccine only in single-dose formulation that are free of thimerosal as a preservative. And draft vote number 4, ACIP recommends that all adults receive seasonal influenza vaccines only in single-dose formulation that are free of thimerosal as a preservative. So, having stated that, we can now move to public comments. And
This committee is a joke.
so there is yes, the correction from the CDC, Dr. Thompson. The Medicaid number is greater than 30,000 pregnant mothers per year in 2019 and 20, not a single flu season. Okay. We are now going to public comments, and do we have the list? So we have 13 individuals. The first is Elias Cass, please.
Good morning. As a naturopathic physician specializing in pediatrics, I encounter vaccine hesitancy regularly. Parents might say, I'm worried about mercury in vaccines. I empathize, I listen, but uncritical affirmation is not my job. Instead, I explain the difference between methylmercury and ethylmercury, how they are metabolized differently, and how removing thimerosal from vaccines didn't make them safer, just more expensive. Relitigation of questions already thoroughly answered, like the safety of thimerosal, is not advancing radical transparency. It is an insidious attempt to suggest that something was missed or hidden previously. When presenters on the harms of thimerosal refer to fake citations suggestive of generative AI use, it's clear that they are starting from a conclusion and then looking for or inventing evidence to support it. That is policy-based evidence making. It's backwards. We heard hours of data yesterday about the risks of COVID in pregnancy and infancy and the effectiveness of the vaccines, all of which support the prior ACIP recommendation. Was there new or different data driving the HHS directive to obviate that recommendation? If there was, why was it not presented in a public meeting so everyone could read it? Demonstrating radical transparency is not making changes without reason or evidence just to imply the previous institutions did not do their job. Doing so creates unjustified mistrust. We cannot pretend that receiving money from pharmaceutical companies is the only conflict of interest. Some people sell supplements that will supposedly protect children from supposed vaccine injury. Some people receive payments to testify against vaccine manufacturers. Some people create a brand or social media empire around being contrarians. Some people receive lucrative salaries from anti-vaccine organizations. These are all conflicts of interest when it comes to making evidence-based vaccine recommendations for millions of people, and they
we lost you there, so.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please continue.
We must be clear that not vaccinating and the prevarications that lead parents to hesitate means taking on the risk of disease. When we focus on myocarditis risk from COVID vaccines without the crucial context of the cardiac risks of COVID disease, we reinforce that idea. When we belabor the fever from MMR vaccine, but not the fever and immune system damage and pneumonia and brain damage from measles, we are not protecting the people we set out to help. It's tempting to think that your health is your reward for a series of good choices, but policy is what determines what choices you have, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the vaccines your insurance covers, the diseases present in your community or kept out by community immunity. These are not individual decisions, no matter what wellness influencers tell you. This committee is determining policy that will shape the landscape of our health.
Wow. Well.
We lost you again.
Why did I know there was going to be issues?
So that is very unfortunate. I think we'll move on to, but thank you very much. I think we heard most of the comments. We move on to Emmett Patterson, please.
Wow.
Good morning. I come to you today with deep concern for the health of our communities, especially as we face a rising tide of vaccine-preventable illnesses. These illnesses have the power to maim, kill, and destroy American lives. And there are diseases and illnesses we have the tools to stop. I'm a public health professional, and I have focused my entire adult career on public health communications. I have worked from the local to the international level, specifically focused on outbreaks that impact LGBTQ people disproportionately, including HIV, other STIs, and even vaccine-preventable illnesses like Mpox virus and COVID. LGBTQ Americans are already facing an alarming burden of vaccine-preventable illnesses, specifically long COVID. Studies show higher rates of infection, more severe outcomes, and development of disabilities. We cannot afford to strip away the single most effective protection we have, updated COVID vaccines available for all. And let's be clear, the science proves that COVID vaccination dramatically reduces the risk of severe illness, disability, and death, even for people without any disabilities or health conditions.
But yet the
Delaying
numbers
or
are
limiting access doesn't just
high,
cause confusion and sows mistrust in communities like mine, it also costs our lives. Decisions about vaccines must be guided by science and not politics. This means restoring transparency, re-engaging expert advisors, and committing to equitable access. Marginalized people in 2025 should not die of diseases we know very well how to prevent, and none of us should have to fight for the protection we know works. I urge this body to reinstate universal COVID vaccine recommendations from children to elders, ensure access for everyone, and make sure the public and public health includes all of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Millicent Gorham, please.
My name is Millicent Gorham, and I serve as the CEO of the Alliance for Women's Health and Prevention, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization focused on advancing policies that support preventive health. I take seriously my role as a spokesperson for the broader public health and vaccine community when I say this. We have profound concerns about the continuity and credibility of our nation's vaccine infrastructure and the destructive impact that recent actions will have on the prevention of vaccine-preventable diseases. To put it bluntly, lives are at risk and decades of public health and trust are being actively and carelessly undermined. This is an unprecedented moment. In my more than 4 decades in healthcare, I have never seen our country leading medical societies voice collective concerns in the way that they have over recent events, including in response to the blatant dismissal of evidence that demonstrates COVID-19 vaccination is safe during pregnancy, and to the sudden, irresponsible firing of ACIP's previous members. Our nation's foremost medical experts who have dedicated their careers to science and safety are raising the alarms. We must not ignore them. AWHP's concerns range from the dismantling of processes that have protected the health of generations to the omission of planned discussions at this very meeting and status of evidence-based vaccine recommendations that await approval, to why resources are being used to re-debate settled science. But especially relevant for today is preserving vaccine choice. ACIP recommendations do not require anyone to get vaccinated, but they do provide the certainty of insurance coverage, which is critical in allowing Americans to access vaccines. In eliminating recommendations, you are threatening coverage and essentially removing choice for people who want to get vaccinated to protect their families, themselves, and their communities. Confusing competing recommendations will only increase vaccine-preventable diseases. The risks here are not theoretical, they are painfully real. Children and adults alike will become sick and die, and from these serious illnesses. Disregarding these facts along with public health expertise, is unacceptable. I implore you to recognize that maintaining the integrity of our nation's vaccine infrastructure is critical to doing so.
Thank you. And next, Nikki Carelli, please.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Nikki Carelli, and I'm Executive Director of the Coalition to Stop Flu. We are a multi-sector federal advocacy coalition dedicated to ending deaths from seasonal and pandemic influenza. Our members represent a unified voice for the influenza ecosystem and include public health and patient advocacy organizations, academic, scientific, and research organizations, healthcare professional organizations, emerging biotech companies, healthcare distributors, and vaccine, antiviral, and diagnostic manufacturers. Our coalition was created because flu is one of our country's most predictable, preventable public health crises. Dr. Folgati presented this morning on the extraordinary annual burden of flu, which includes not only tens of thousands of deaths, but hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations and millions of illnesses. Multiple researchers have estimated that flu costs our country billions of dollars a year in direct and indirect costs.
But your vaccines work.
When we speak about flu, we speak about the continuum of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. Although all three components are critically important, flu vaccination is broadly cited by physicians and public health agencies as the best way to reduce the risk of becoming infected with flu and any of its potentially serious complications.
These people contradict
The
themselves.
flu vaccine has been administered to billions of people worldwide over decades and has an exceptionally strong safety record, making it one of the most well-studied and trusted tools in modern public health. ACIP's recommendation for annual flu vaccination for all Americans over 6 months of age without contraindications is critical to preserving access for the more than 100 million Americans who made the choice to get the flu shot last year. One of the most frustrating phrases that those of us in the influenza community often hear is, "It's just the flu." Dr. Dugan noted this morning the record number of pediatric deaths this season. 250 deaths breaks the record that we broke only last year for the number of pediatric deaths in a non-pandemic year. And also breaking records, 90% of those children were unvaccinated, up from 80% in prior years. That's 250 families with a missing seat at the dinner table that they will mourn every night for the rest of their lives. Pediatric influenza deaths were the genesis of the influenza recommendation that we have today, and they are exactly why we must stay the course. As you all know, ACIP does not set requirements. Instead, you serve a vital role as an aggregator and interpreter of evidence-based data. And perhaps most critically, your recommendations are directly tied to insurance coverage. The current influenza recommendation preserves access for hundreds of millions of Americans and ensures that patients who choose to be vaccinated can get their shot in a convenient setting. And most importantly, it saves lives. Thank you for taking on this incredibly important role, and the coalition looks forward to working with you to help restore public trust and confidence in vaccines.
Thank you for that. The next is Ronald Owens, please.
I was the California Department of Public Health employee between 2009 and 2023. On April 14, 2022, Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra said this about COVID-19 vaccines. Quote, "We know that vaccines are killing people of color, Blacks, Latinos, indigenous people at about 2 times the rate of white Americans. As a black man who loves all humanity, this concerned me. On April 18, 2022, I emailed Deputy Director what Becerra said, indicated various data about allergic reactions, facial paralysis, miscarriages, heart attacks, heart inflammation, seizures, strokes, and sudden deaths, plus stated there were 26,976 COVID-19 vaccine deaths. On October 13, 2022, I informed Deputy Director there were 31,330 deaths. Californians were told COVID-19 vaccines are, quote, safe and effective. That is a lie. I prematurely retired so state public health officials could not muzzle truth from the public. Since then, I emailed COVID-19 vaccine warning written notifications to 58 California Board of Supervisors, totaling 296 county elected and 62 administratively appointed local officials. I urged them to direct county health officers to start promoting, administering, and distributing COVID-19 vaccines. I would not have rode on my motorcycle more than 9,000 miles, urged 39 county board of supervisors to stop the shots, and inform the California Board of Pharmacy if I was not convinced that COVID-19 vaccines are killing people. Yesterday, I listened to subject matter experts assure the public that COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Have they reached out and talked to any vaccine injured? There are millions. I can introduce you to at least 4. Shelley, Julie, Lori, Tanya. They shared their pain and suffering on the Stop the Shot space on X every night from 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. How about an ACIP COVID-19 vaccine victims listening tour? We will help coordinate. People are suffering. People are dying. The government urged them to take the COVID-19 vaccines, and now the government has completely abandoned them. Please do not ignore pain and suffering of your fellow citizens who were told COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. At minimum, federal health officials must inform Americans today that COVID-19 vaccines are killing people at an alarming rate.
Thank you. Next speaker is Catherine Vanner Perez, please.
Good morning. My name is Keisha Warner Perez, and I serve as the Director of Health Programs at the Alliance for Aging Research. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. We have 5 recommendations. First, we urge ACIP to vote on COVID-19 vaccine recommendations as was stated in the Federal Register notice for this meeting. COVID-19 continues to pose a significant risk of severe illness, hospitalization, and death across the lifespan. Between the fall of 2023 and 2024, the CDC reported more than 36,000 deaths among adults 65 and older and 152 deaths in children. That's the equivalent of nearly 100 older adults dying each day and 1 child dying every 2.5 days. The HHS Secretary's preemptive removal of COVID-19 vaccines from the recommended schedule for healthy pregnant people and children undermines ACIP's 50-year role of providing expert perspectives and advice on the use of vaccines in the U.S. population. This decision also contradicts the FDA's newly published framework, which recognizes pregnancy as a high-risk condition. And because of this change, the American Pharmacists Association has withheld its endorsement of the current schedule. Second, we strongly urge the CDC to finalize ACIP's April vote on RSV. That vote would lower the age for risk-based recommendations for the RSV vaccine to include adults aged 50 to 59. RSV causes 42,000 hospitalizations annually in adults 50 to 64, and over 13 million adults in this age group have conditions that increase their risk of severe RSV. This change would save lives and reduce healthcare costs. Third, please reinstate the vote on influenza vaccines for this year's strain that was promised at the April meeting. Otherwise, CMS and insurers will not cover them. Fourth, while we're grateful to see the approved vote on RSV for the Vaccines for Children program, we ask that ACIP restore all originally planned votes, including for COVID-19, HPV, and influenza. Without these votes, there's no guarantee of free vaccines for children who need them this fall. Finally, we strongly oppose any vote on thimerosal-containing influenza vaccines. The FDA has long confirmed the thimerosal safety record, and it's only used as a preservative in multi-dose adult flu vaccines to prevent bacterial and fungal growth. Removing it would disproportionately harm resource-constrained settings like nursing homes and long-term care facilities that serve older adults and rely on MDVs. More broadly, this discussion will unnecessarily sow doubt on vaccines. While the Alliance opposed the Secretary's decision to fire all 17 previous ACIP members, we now look to you to fulfill this critical responsibility. We urge you to prioritize scientific integrity and impartiality as ACIP has done for 50 years. The health of the American people is in your hands. Thank you.
You don't care about the health
Thank
of the
you.
American
And next is Alison Howell.
Hello, I'm Allison Howells, and I'm the Communications Coordinator at Vaccinate Your Family. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Vaccinate Your Family is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to saving lives from vaccine-preventable diseases. For more than 30 years, we have relied on ACIP recommendations to guide our work in educating the public. For our organization, preventing unnecessary death from disease is personal. In 2009, our colleague, Sabrice Murata, lost her healthy 5-year-old son, Joseph, to flu. Our organization works closely with parents and family members who have lost loved ones or suffered consequences from vaccine-preventable diseases. We honor the memories of Kimberly and Emily, young women who died from meningococcal B virus just a few years before a vaccine was available, Callie, Carter, Bree, and Brady, who died as infants from whooping cough before a vaccine for pregnant women became widely available, Teresa, a 10-year-old who lost her life to COVID 1 month before a vaccine became available for kids. We strive every day to stop suffering from diseases like these, as well as HIV, varicella, RSV, hepatitis, measles, shingles, and more. These are just a few of the personal stories we honor today. There are sadly many, many more, and there will be many more stories like this if access to life-saving vaccines is compromised due to changes in recommendations that affect insurance coverage or cause confusion amongst providers and the public. We will be watching to understand how the members handle their new responsibility to protect the American people and keep America healthy. We call on HHS and CDC to ensure that committee members avoid cherry-picking of data in order to draw conclusions that fit any previously conceived notions about vaccine safety. We hope to see members set aside personal beliefs and ideologies and base their conclusions and recommendations on the preponderance of available, credible scientific data. Following the National Academy of Sciences review of the childhood and adolescent vaccination schedule, they concluded that vaccines are among the most safe and effective public health interventions to prevent serious disease and death. If access to life-saving vaccines is compromised in any way, more children, adolescents, and adults will die. More people will suffer needlessly from preventable diseases. More families will be devastated by preventable tragedies as Americans become needlessly ill from diseases that decades ago crippled public health. We need only to look to history to see what will befall us if vaccines are no longer a part of preventative health care. Vaccines need to remain available, accessible, and affordable. Lives depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next speaker is Abraham himself, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
By the grace of God. Secretary Kennedy, CDC leadership, Chairman Kuldorf, and members of the ACIP panel, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Abraham Seth, and I come to you today not as a scientist, but as a father who lost his child not to illness, but to a system that misunderstood your guidance. Years ago, during a custody dispute, I expressed concern about the Gardasil vaccine, not out of neglect, but out of sincere beliefs and a desire to protect my child, and who did not want his sole child to become the next Colton from Utah. That position led to an order of protection in the family court. The charges were eventually dropped, but the damage was done. the relationship with my son was severed, not by violence or abandonment, but by the unintended legal consequences of a medical recommendation. And I'm far from alone. Across the country, thousands of well-meaning moms and dads have been sidelined by family courts and child protection systems that treat ACIP recommendations as if they were mandates. A question, a hesitation, or a delay has too often been used as grounds to accuse a parent of being unfit. I want to be clear, neither the current members of this panel nor the previous ones caused this problem. ACIP has always been made up of individuals acting with integrity, compassion, and a genuine commitment to public health. But your work has been hijacked, not by you, but by courts, agencies, and individuals who use your recommendations as blunt legal instruments. And while you didn't cause this misuse, with deliberation and sensitivity, you have a unique opportunity to help correct it. I sometimes wonder aloud, could there be a broader systemic incentives, financial, bureaucratic, or even ideological, that benefit when families fall apart? I don't pretend to know the answer, but I do know this. When well-intended medical guidance is stripped of its nuance, real families suffer. That's why I'm here, not to accuse, but to ask. I respectfully urge this committee to consider including a clear disclaimer on all vaccine recommendations. That ACIP recommendations are expert guidance, not mandates, and that a parent's choice not to follow them in part or in full should not be used in isolation to question parental fitness or justify legal action. I've drafted sample language that I believe is brief, balanced, and helpful. It is available at tinyurl.com/ACIP disclaimer. Again, that's tinyurl.com/ACIP disclaimer, and I humbly welcome your consideration. Thank you again for your time, your work, and your unwavering dedication to the well-being of children, parents, and the nuclear family unit. I believe we can work together to ensure that your voice continues to guide, not divide, the lives of those who trust in it. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
Thank you very much for those comments. The next speaker is Paulo Ballester.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Paula Ballester. I'm a double board certified pediatrician, a practicing pediatric hospitalist, and a mother to an amazing 12-year-old son. For over 15 years, I've had the privilege of caring for children during some of the most critical moments in their lives. I have seen the destruction that vaccine-preventable diseases can cause firsthand. Our dedicated team has treated patients who are neurologically devastated by meningitis, healthy children on life support from influenza, babies gasping for air from pertussis. While the volume of these cases remains small, thanks entirely to the success of routine childhood immunizations, the rare cases we do see are almost exclusively in patients that were not vaccinated. My dreams have been haunted by the guttural screams of parents that have just lost their child and their desperate pleas to turn back time and accept the vaccine that could have given their child a chance to grow up. Wow. Vaccines are arguably the greatest achievement in public health in our lifetime, preventing 4 to 5 million deaths per year globally. The ACIP has helped guide every major U.S. vaccine recommendation since 1964. Historically, it was comprised of leading experts under strict conflict of interest and transparency rules to keep the process focused on safety and evidence. Today is a sad day as our current administration has chosen to gut those existing standards, a decision that could claim countless lives if the newest appointees choose to let propaganda and conspiracy theory guide decisions rather than decades of vetted science and expertise. I understand that parents are scared and overwhelmed. There is so much information out there, some of it false and some of it deliberately misleading. But here is what has not changed: the data. Tens of thousands of patients studied, including with placebo-controlled trials, spanning many countries and scientists, with consistently replicated results, all validated by rigorous peer review. Childhood vaccines are safe and effective. Parents have every right to ask questions. It's okay to be cautious when it comes to your child. They're your world, and as a mother, I know this. But please trust trustworthy people who are trained to weigh risks and benefits, not the ones repeating conspiracy theories. Talk to your pediatrician. They have spent their entire careers to understand how to help protect your children and help them grow to their fullest potential. We have always been here for you, and we always will be. To the ACIP, now is not the time to step back from science. It's time to stand tall and lead. I urge this body to have the courage to follow the evidence. Vaccines are not political. They are not about propaganda, power, or control. They are about protection of our children, our communities, and our shared future. You will be responsible for the loss of life if you walk back accepted immunization schedules and limit access to vaccines. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Christine Martin, please.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Christine Martin. I'm a board-certified pediatrician with over 30 years of pediatric primary care and public health experience. I, like my predecessor in the previous speech, am advocating for vaccines. I have always been a fierce advocate for my patients and their families, but today I'm here on behalf of all pediatricians, pediatric nurse practitioners, and family practice providers who firmly believe in the value, efficacy, and safety of vaccines. In the course of my long career, I've personally seen children suffering from vaccine-preventable diseases. However, I've also witnessed dramatic decreases and near absence of some diseases due to the introduction and routine use of the pneumococcal, H-flu, and meningitis vaccines. I've also seen the benefit of boosters of MMR, varicella, and DTaP and Tdap. Finally, in the past years, I've had for the first time in my career tools to protect newborns and young infants from severe RSV disease. My exposure to vaccine-preventable disease and the harm and permanent disability they can cause came very early in life. One of my older brothers was deaf, and although he was not born deaf, many of his friends and classmates were due to congenital rubella syndrome, a condition whereby a pregnant woman who contracts the disease passes it on to her fetus. And the infection leads to a wide range of birth effects, including sensorineural hearing loss or profound deafness. Rubella is now a vaccine-preventable disease thanks to the MMR vaccine, which was developed in 1971. And since the routine implementation of that vaccine, the incidence of rubella and congenital rubella have decreased so drastically that I, in my career, have never seen a case of it. I graduated from college and went into the Peace Corps in South America, where I saw unvaccinated children with mumps, whooping cough, and adults permanently disabled and paralyzed by polio. I also saw infants die from whooping cough and pneumococcal pneumonia. And I also saw vaccine-preventable diseases in my training in medical school and in residency at UCSF. As a medical student at UC Vermont, I had to take care of a baby with pneumococcal meningitis. And I'll never forget the 13-year-old girl who was brought in by her mom to San Francisco General ER with a fever and headache, and within 20 minutes she was in septic shock, and if she had not been in that ER, she would have died from meningitis. Currently, vaccines are a dam that is the best tool available and prevents children and infants from vaccine-preventable diseases. And vaccines are the greatest public health achievement of the 20th century. Unfortunately, that dam is now cracks and fissures due to misinformation and public fear. At the present time, we are seeing the effect of that with the measles outbreak. If the cracks and holes continue to increase, the dam will fail, and we will start to see more and more cases of vaccine-preventable disease and the harmful effects of these diseases. Right now is the time to support and advocate for the routine vaccination schedule as is. These schedules were developed by experts, knowledgeable, highly qualified, and vetted scientists, researchers, and public health experts who are well-respected national experts on vaccines.
And who have a vested interest in big
my
pharma.
entire career to helping and caring for children strongly endorse the current childhood vaccination schedules, and I implore you not to change them. I also
we're going to have to break here because the 3 minutes are way over. We have 3 more speakers that we want to make room for, and the next one is Elizabeth Hornbeck. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
So my name is Elizabeth Hornbeck, and I'm a pediatric hospitalist and mom of 2 wonderful boys. I really appreciate you giving me your time so I can speak to this committee today. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, and my compensation is in no way tied to vaccination rates of my patients. I want to start by stating that I respect the scientific background of the new ACIP committee, since I myself have been almost entirely involved in clinical medicine since finishing training. I know the committee understands the data, and I know you will assess the risks and benefits of your recommendations very carefully. I am simply here to give you the perspective of a clinical practitioner and concerned parent. I have seen previously healthy children lose half of their lungs due to influenza. I've had to hug these parents while they cried and blame themselves for not getting the flu vaccine sooner. I've seen children, again previously healthy, neurologically devastated from influenza encephalitis. I have been unsure of how to answer the question, will they be okay, when I am transferring a baby to the PICU with RSV bronchiolitis. I try to reassure them that most do recover, but I am a person for whom honesty is a core value, and sometimes it is difficult to predict. This is not fear-mongering. This is to give a backdrop to why I, myself, as a parent and a pediatrician, vaccinate my children. A lot of physicians will give arguments of we should love thyself as our neighbor as an argument to vaccinate kids due to more vulnerable populations and the benefits the immunity gives them, the herd immunity gives them. I like to think that I'm that selfless, but the truth is I'm not. My kids get vaccines because they're safe, and I'm much more fearful of the harm that actual diseases can do. I vaccinate my kids first and foremost for selfish reasons, and thereafter for public health reasons. I encourage the ACIP members to continue with the previously recommended vaccine schedule. Vaccines need to be widely available, and to not recommend these vaccines affects insurance coverage and potentially in the future supply based on lack of insurance coverage. I fear the effect this would have on public health. The children of the United States are depending on you to do the right thing. I think we can all agree that the USA's strength is what makes our country so great. Let's create strong kids through evidence-based vaccine recommendations so they have the ability to continue our country's legacy of strength. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Neil Patel, please.
Thank you. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to share my comments. I come here today as a general pediatrician and a new father whose day-to-day work involves providing well childcare and answering questions about vaccines. I am the one families call in the middle of the night when they're worried their infant is having trouble breathing with RSV. I see nearly 1,000 newborn infants each year, and I'm often the first doctor these families meet. Ubiquitously, their first question is often when they can start protecting their newborn with vaccines. I felt obligated to take some time between my busy clinical schedule to share the most common concern that the families of my patients have been expressing to me. They are afraid that their children will no longer have access to life-saving vaccinations. I served on the front lines during the COVID pandemic during my final year in residency. I was in the emergency room, the oncology units, and the pediatric intensive care unit. I saw teenagers placed on ventilators while their parents watched on video calls. Walking around the hospital, I still see shadows of colleagues lost during the pandemic. I'm heartbroken at the thought of those who would still be with us had the COVID vaccines been available sooner. I express my sincere gratitude to the scientists and former members of this committee whose work and recommendations on COVID vaccines saved countless lives during the pandemic. My message is simple. No child, no adult, no grandparent should be denied access to proven life-saving science. Vaccines eliminate disease. The recommendations of this committee determine the coverage of vaccines by insurance companies and critically by the Vaccines for Children's program. I can think of no public health intervention in this country that has been as effective as the Vaccines for Children program. As the new chair of this committee repeatedly pointed out, the recommendations of this committee should adhere to evidence-based medicine. Follow the science. Please continue to be transparent with the science. Just yesterday, materials that had been posted on the ACIP website were removed, specifically a CDC document on thimerosal containing vaccines, which stated to, quote, considering the breadth of evidence and consistency in results from multiple population-based studies conducted in several countries with various study designs, the evidence does not support an association between thimerosal containing vaccines and autism spectrum disorder or other neurodevelopmental disorders, close quote. I am left to wonder why this document was removed from the website at some point yesterday. I hope that all members of this committee heed the creative evidence-based medicine and protect access to life-saving vaccinations. Long COVID, the vertical transmission of hepatitis, HPV-associated cervical cancer, measles, encephalitis all belong in history textbooks, not in our clinics, hospitals, schools, or homes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. And our last speaker is Akshata Hopkins. Please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yes. I'm Dr. Akshata Hopkins, a board-certified pediatric hospitalist, where I care for some of the sickest children, those who require hospital-based treatment. But today I speak as a medical expert in children's health, a concerned parent of 2 incredible boys, and a citizen, with a deep desire to protect our children, our families, and our communities. I still remember a 13-year-old boy who presented with high fever, rash, and lethargy. His spinal tap revealed pus. He was quickly diagnosed with Neisseria meningitis. A 4-week-old infant diagnosed with pertussis, who repeatedly stopped breathing, what we call apnea, and later developed refractory and prolonged seizures. A previously healthy 5-year-old girl hospitalized for 28 days with complicated Haemophilus influenza type B meningitis, who suffered permanent hearing loss. These are patients I vividly recall even now, more than 15 years later. Why? Because these illnesses were preventable. In fact, thanks to vaccines, I haven't seen these diseases in over a decade. But here's what deeply concerns me. Many younger physicians have never been trained to recognize or manage these diseases, simply because vaccines have made them so rare. If we weaken vaccine infrastructure or public confidence, we risk losing an entire generation of providers who will be caught unprepared, and more importantly, we risk children paying the price. In a world where we are advancing treatments and cures for complex pediatric conditions, it's alarming to think that we might slide backwards, watching children suffer or die from illnesses we know how to prevent. As a pediatrician, I have long relied on the ACIP's evidence-based recommendations to guide my clinical practice, support vaccine confidence, and promote equitable access to immunization services. Vaccines are one of the most powerful tools we have in public health. But when the role of medical experts is diminished, or worse, removed, and when science is politicized, everyone loses. Confusion grows, trust erodes, and preventable diseases like measles, meningitis, and pertussis return. I urge this committee and those who shape its future to protect the scientific integrity and expert-driven process that ACIP has always upheld. We may not all agree on every detail of every policy, but I hope we can agree on this. The health of our children deserves decisions led by evidence, not ideology. Thank you again for your service and for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and thank you to all the 13 speakers. We very much appreciate receiving feedback from the public in this manner. We will now go to a 5-minute presentation about the Anthrax vaccine. And that will be presented by Dr. Brandon Jackson at CDC.
Great, thanks so much. I'm Brandon Jackson of the Division of High Consequence Pathogens and Pathology. I'll be presenting a few slides to describe the intent to form an anthrax vaccine work group. Next slide, please. So as a very brief background, Bacillus anthracis is the causative agent of anthrax and a spore-forming bacterium found naturally in soil around the world, including in some parts of the United States. Humans are most often infected by exposure to infected animals or animal byproducts through the cutaneous, gastrointestinal, or inhalational routes. However, B. anthracis is also a Tier 1 select agent due to its potential and past use as a bioweapon, its high case fatality rate, and ability to cause great harm to public health and safety, particularly when aerosolized. Is the sound not working too well? It's okay?
No, it's not working very well.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. We're proposing that the work group review a new vaccine newish, called Anthrax Vaccine Adjuvanted, or AVAA, trade name Cyfendus, which is a second-generation anthrax vaccine that includes the addition of an adjuvant. It was licensed by the FDA in July of 2023 for post-exposure prophylaxis, following exposure to B. anthracis in adults aged 18 to 65. The Anthrax Vaccine Work Group intends to review the safety and immunogenicity of AVAA to develop recommendations for ACIP to consider for domestic use of this vaccine for anthrax post-exposure prophylaxis. That concludes my brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making it brief. The next presentation is by myself about the MMRV vaccine. If we can have the slides. No, the slides about the MMRV vaccine. We will take a 5 minutes break now, and we will be back at 12:25. So
Really,
thank you.
that's special. Stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. Stay safe and mindful.